All right. Oh, God. Whew. So, how are you? Here I am at the tail end of record 400 or something. I don't believe it's 400, but it's enough that it feels that way because the patterns are so consistent. Hey, it's Devin, and I'm about a week away from finishing Power Nerd. In theory, that's the deadline that I have, and I've got a week with Steve after that. And my thought was to be done Power Nerd in its entirety prior to that. I've hit a couple of hurdles that there's very little I could do about. We had a 2-day power outage. A bunch of files were corrupted. Just silly things. But I'm still, in theory, I'm on track to finish by the 31st. In a worst case scenario, I would want to do recalls after, like on the 7th, and then put the final touches on it. But we'll see how we go. The process right now has been profoundly frustrating. But I say that as if this is an isolated incident. But it's a lot like childbirth, I would assume, in that the pain that women feel upon delivering children is such that in that moment, there's no possible way that you would ever want to consider doing that again. Yet the mind is such an interesting thing. Given 6 months, you're like, fine, we'll do it again. I think making records are similar. Well, it's not similar to childbirth. I don't think there's anything that a human can experience that's more painful than that. So this certainly pales in comparison. But in terms of that sort of, first word that springs to mind is ideology, and that's not it. But in terms of that, it's fucking hard. And it's really, really psychologically uncomfortable at this stage. Why? There's so many reasons. This is going to be a long video. So if you have no interest in hearing me ramble and say the same 7 words over and over again, then you might as well go do something else, because here we go. Where do I even start? Why is it so difficult at the end? I don't know. It's like the anxiety that I feel about sitting in front of the computer and just finishing it is like, it's something that is just so strange. Maybe it's because by finishing it, it makes it real. And the psychological components of this record, which were so tied thematically to things such as loss or death or kids moving out or getting older or the world being in a place and a state that it is very clearly in. It's all theoretical until you're at the end. And then you realize that you've committed to this. And that in order for the music to be what it set out to be, since its inception, those ideas all need to be faced and committed to, which I think a lot of times is why people struggle to finish projects. Because at this stage, you're like, oh, right, yeah, no, every day is you have to commit. Every minute you have to commit. As I'm going through the tracks, editing and consolidating vocals, and then getting it sent out to mastering or to label or additional musicians or whoever, those things that you've been able to hold off on committing to, in order for those pieces to be presentable, you need to commit. And with the speed in which this record was written, there's a lot of sort of on the fence moments, things that I think to myself, oh, it's written so quickly, so I'll get to that. It's written so quickly that this idea is just a placeholder, but when it's time, I'll come back around and I will decide whether or not it's that word or that phrase or that sentiment. But then by the time you get to the end of it, those decisions are just such a constant part of your world. Every time you open up a song, it's like, oh, what do you do with that snare fill? What was it? That's that thing that you were thinking about. What do you do with that kick sound? That's the thing that you've been holding on. What are you doing with that verse? Oh, you didn't make a decision on what the melodic contents are. Well, you have 3. Okay, of those 3, which one? And you're just like, oh my God. And that process is frustrating in ways that nothing else in my life is. It's not like an irreparable frustration where you can't do it and you can't get over it. But what it requires, and I remember this now, and it's good for me to be able to document this process because it's almost like well, it's clearly like I forget every time. But once you get to the end, you just you can't run from it. And not only from the work and the decisions and the frustration and the fatigue, but also just from the work. You know, they say that the best way to keep your bedroom clean is to have a big exam. So I've been trying to remember that my tendency to want to procrastinate right now is much more to do with the fact that the workload to conclude these songs is extensive. And with the amount of time that I have, not only is it extensive, but it's omnipresent. You can't step away from it. There's just no time. And not only that, but once you get into that frame of mind where you are saying, right, okay, let's commit to all these final things. It's a frame of mind that can only be sustained by continuing with it. It's like you have to get into the groove and then just remember that it's that relentless decision-making, problem-solving frame of mind is so easily distractible. It's so easy to sway that by saying, oh, I'll just go take a break now. Because, of course, taking breaks is healthy and essential for mixing, of course. But those breaks can turn into a long break. And then when you come back, you're overwhelmed again. And that constant state of being overwhelmed by it can really be a deterrent. I know for myself how it manifests is anxiety, but not in the sense of I feel like there's a Sasquatch behind the door or something, but more it's just breathing. It's hard to get deep breaths because you're just in this constant state of heightened, I don't even know what the phrase or what the term would be. It's like you need to make decisions all the time. You're like, okay, so what's the time management today? What song are we doing? How do we finish this? How do we fix that? Where do we find those files? Which of these 3 melodies do you decide on? And then when you're mixing, I haven't even gotten into my notes that I'm going to be rambling to you about today. But mixing is fucking hard, man. And anyone who tells you different is, let's going back to the Princess Bride, is trying to sell some stupid online mixing course. That's how I feel. This is the way the pros do it. The problem with that type of thinking is there's no one size that fits all. And I realize much of what I have spent endless time and resource over the past however many years trying to offshore, trying to get somebody else to do it, whether or not it's playing the bass or playing the guitar solos or mixing or whatever. The reason why I recognize now I've been soliciting people to do those things is not because I can't do it, but because I've been led to believe that there's ways that are surefire in order to achieve these big aims, that if you only do it a certain way, you'll be guaranteed success. And then when I do that, and I'm sure those of you who produce and mix your own music out there, when you do it as well, you're like, why didn't that work? Why didn't that stupid sidechain fucking trick that, these smug dudes on YouTube tell you is that's how you do it, doesn't work? Well, it's because every song is different. And every song is a different key, a different tempo, a different set of sonic characteristics that interplay with each other in such tenuous ways that if it was only as simple as being able to run it through some AI or some template, and then you would get great results every time, well, then everybody would be able to do it. I've heard tell of mixing engineers, Chris Lord-Alge or whoever, who claim that they have they just have a bunch of gear that they run everything through, and it's sort of like a factory. And I would imagine that if you're working with music that falls into a format that is easily dissectable on a technical level, you're like, okay, you're in E. The key is E. And therefore, the frequencies that participate in that key are X, Y, and Z. And then some, of course. And that tempo and this type of drum sound and this type of vocal tonality and this technique for getting the chorus, all these things, perhaps you could apply those techniques to, and it would work to a lesser or greater degree. Here's why that doesn't work, at least for me. My experience with trying to hire people who I have determined on some insecure level are vastly superior to me in their technical ability to create the sounds that I'm hoping to achieve with my music. Throughout my career, which has been 35 years, consistently, I have said to myself, I'm not a good mixer. I'm a shitty mixer. And when I first started mixing, absolutely, I was a shitty mixer. And so I would make a record because of either finances or attempting to find somebody and the visions didn't line up in terms of conceptually. And I would find them and I'd ask them to mix the work. And then these people who have been touted as being these preeminent mixing engineers, my music comes back sounding poor. Every time. And I'm thinking, well, this must be the recording then. That's, it can't just be that this guy who's made all these great sounding records is unable to achieve those aims with my music for any reason other than I must have done something wrong on an engineering level. So what I've done in the past is I will then seek out engineers to track the drums, to track the bass, to track the guitar. And my insecurity in the past has led me to thinking, well, there's tried and true ways to achieve these aims, and the reason why these preeminent mixing engineers can't make my music sound like it does in my head is because I'm not using a tube amp, or I'm not using, the rooms that I track the drums in have a frequency at, 250 that is problematic consistently, and therefore it's all stacking up because the amount of keyboards that I use and all this sort of thing, whatever. So I keep going through and have gone through these processes, whether or not it's with mixing engineers or with different players, different sounds, whatever, thinking that the reason I can't achieve what it is that my mind feels the music should sound like is because, I'll just say it, because I suck, all these other people know something that I clearly don't, and by attempting to use these people and spending, by the way, a ton of money, it doesn't work. Because why? Well, gotta be my engineering, gotta be but what I've realized is that I am the best person to mix my music. Anytime I've had anybody attempt to put my work through that factory, either on a conceptual level, on a compositional level, or a mix level, whatever, all these tips and tricks that everybody just is breathlessly selling us to say this is how you make it work. People saying, don't do this. Whatever you do, this is the top 3 mistakes that producers and engineers make. It's all fucking hooey. There's some tips there, of course, on a rudimentary level that I had to learn over time as an engineer, as a mixer, as a producer. I had to learn. There's certain things, of course, that really do make sense, and trial and error will prove after a while that it's like, yeah, that does make sense. Mixing in solo, for example, is like, I used to do that a lot, and then now I realize, over the past few years, I've realized that, yeah, it's all about being in context, and all these things. There are a lot of rules of thumb that I do stick to, and that I appreciate the lessons that I've learned from people online or people that I've had the privilege of working with. But the biggest tip, if I'm going to dispense some sort of mixing knowledge to you, is if you've got a singular vision, let alone that you're in crazy tunings with all sorts of different types of orchestrations and choral aspects in your voice and the idiosyncrasies of the tempos and the tones that you choose, and if you choose to use a lot of echo, irregardless of that, you have to learn, if you are blessed/cursed with a singular vision, you have to learn to mix your own shit. Like, that's it. And I'm not the world's best mixer, but I'm getting better. And what I realize is I'm the best mixer by a huge margin for my material. Doesn't mean that I'm the best at it yet. God, the amount of things that are frustrating with mixing is just, it's like whack-a-mole. It's like trying to herd cats. You open up a new song, different tempo, different key, different sounds, different guitar, blah, 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 blah. Trying to get, like the interplay between the bass and the kick drum to work. And then because of the particular kick drum and how it was tuned, and then the bass and how that was tuned, and what the key is and how that interacts with the room, it's whack-a-mole every song. And the thing that I think I resent so much about what we're taught, or what we're being, coerced into believing that we're being taught from YouTube videos about fucking mixing, is that it's like a puzzle. Everything lines up, and then once it's done, you've got this picture. It's not that. One thing affects everything else, like the synths and how they interact with the drums, and how the cymbals interact with the mid-range of the vocals, and how the mid-range of the vocals interacts with the key that you're singing, how the key that you're singing interacts with the interplay of certain notes and certain spectrums on the bass, and how the bass interacts with the bass synth. It's like, if I have a tip to give to people who mix their own music, is it's like, when it works because of an intangible amount of invisible paper clips holding this fucking clown boat together. And if you're lucky and you're focused and you're able to sit and put aside the anxiety that comes from pressures externally, family, deadlines, money, all these things, if you're fortunate that you can have the presence of mind to hear it, not just be present with it, but to hear it and integrate what you're hearing into what your original vision was, then you can utilize these techniques that we learn, and frankly, they are online, of course. You can utilize those techniques to have contingency plans for a myriad of potential, unexpected, and wildly chaotic problems that come up. So the other thing that I would say, if you're mixing your own music, is we're in an environment now where these techniques, these tutorials are so ubiquitous that one could be forgiven for thinking that everyone who listens to your music is a better engineer than you, is a better mixing engineer than you. I've had people in the past saying, oh, can I get stems so I can remix your music? And I think, man, it's the whole audience. Is it based on people who are just fundamentally incredible mixers? If that was the case, I would hear music that I would think sounded better than most of the music that I do hear. Some of it, of course, is incredible, but a lot of what I think is incredible mixes fits into a preordained creative zone. Technical death metal, for example. This is a genre that is established in a way that there's a template for what is a popular version of that sound. And so, yes, I believe that if you were doing something that had a benchmark to reach, you would be able to get close to that, of course, or hand it off to somebody who does that. But again, what I'm saying is if you're not doing something that falls into a preordained category, you have to accept so much about the process. One of which is, for me, admitting, I'm like, listen, I never wanted to mix. I always wanted just to give it to somebody so it would sound like amazing. But anytime I did that and paid thousands and thousands of dollars every time to give it to Joe Schmo, the super famous mixer who's mixed these things, and it comes back, I'm like, man, it sounds like fucking dog shit. Or they're like, well, here's the problem with your mix, man. You have too many elements in it. So if you want it to sound big, we're going to do this. We're going to remove all these things that you've spent months and months, weeks in this case, working on the nuances of. And then we'll present you what you think your music should sound like. And invariably what it comes back as is big drums, big bass, big guitar, big vocal. All the rest of it, the choral aspects, the keyboard aspects, the nuances of the delays, all the little ramps, things that I hear and really bother me if they're not in place, are completely ignored. And in my experience, also when I say, hey, listen, yes, I understand that by making this sound like AC/DC in terms of how we are approaching the instrumentation of this mix, yes, you can get a size that I wasn't able to achieve, but it's not the song. And when people say to me, well, you can't do that, I think that's an excuse for you not knowing how the fuck to do it. No, you can't do that. That's not how it's done. Okay, just say you don't know how to do it. So for me, I am the best candidate to mix my work. However, it's meant having to learn how to mix, and not only learning how to mix, but retroactively reversing things that I've been doing for years that I never learned how to do properly. This sort of flies in the face of my critique about people online giving you um, insight into how to do this. But I guess the distinction between what I was saying then and what I'm saying now is, it's one thing to learn techniques, but it's another thing to claim that those techniques is how you get perfect mixes, perfect low end every time, all this shit. It's like, so where I'm at now is I've had to relearn and start to learn things that I never participated in, because I was always under the assumption that I would just find somebody that was better than me at mixing my music, and that's insane. And it's insane for you too. Like, no one's gonna mix idiosyncratic material better than you if you really know it. Unless you're going to be able to pay somebody for months and months and months of time, and they're going to be tolerant enough for you to waffle about certain things and get really particular about frequencies. I remember when I was first starting, I worked with an engineer, and they would say to me, we'd do an edit that I thought was sort of shitty, and they'd say, you got to ask yourself this question: will it affect record sales? And I was like, let me answer your question like this: I don't give a fuck. How's that? And if that's your rationale for not wanting to fix that, good luck. Many of those engineers are no longer working. I see that. So there's perhaps credence to the fact that if something bothers you, and if it's something that's important for you to fix, and as long as you're mentally strong enough to not allow the obsession to take over and then ruin your momentum and your deadlines and all this, then I think you should pursue those things, because all these things strike me as excuses. So I learned how to do it. And now, yeah, this is where I'm at, man. I'm not the fucking best mixer. Holy shit. And if you put out records in 2024, the first thing that's going to happen is you've got an army of people who are professional engineers and mixers that are going to be critiquing your work. And I admit there's a part of me, because I've been so insecure about mixing and engineering and producing for so long, that plays into it. As opposed to thinking, that sounds great, and it's as good as I can do with the time that I've got. I can't take this any further with my skill set, with my tools, with the recording. I have to let this go. It's easy for me to lose sight of the forest for the trees by thinking, yeah, but what are people going to think? Are people going to think it's too compressed? And you know what? And this week I found myself being like, Dev, fuck it. Fuck it. Really. If you're hung up on what other people think about you doing your best, then you got bigger problems than a mix. So I would suggest the same for you. And so I will end this part of my conversation about the mix thing by saying, I've made a lot of progress on this record. I've managed to learn a lot. I've learned a lot about low end. I've learned a lot about low mids, and it's almost like every record there's a certain amount of technical problems that come into the process that force you, if you're in the position of being autonomous with your work, as I am, to have to say, okay, well, what's that problem? And then you come out of it saying, okay, I've moved forward. I've made progress. The way that I've made progress with Power Nerd is phase. I never considered phase in the past. But now I'm hyper aware of it, and I realize how much work I've got to do on that in the future. And every project that you do is essentially meant to push your work further, to try and get that aim that you've set out to achieve from a very basic level further and further. So how do you refine it? How do you take, in my case, how do I take what Devin Townsend is and the sound that I like to hear? How do I learn how to do that? How would I, in any possible way, hope that somebody else would do what I want to do to my music better than I? There's people that have a higher degree of technical knowledge. Absolutely. I mean, I'm at 35 to 40% of where I'd like to be on a technical level. But what they don't have is your connection to the work itself. The intrinsic qualities of a phrase can be sabotaged by a type of nuance that very simply can be done with riding a fader or a certain type of EQ, that it's something you know on a intrinsic level. Like I know that because I wrote it. I can explain it to people, but it's a fucking pain in the ass. So what I've had to recognize is, like, Dev, if you really want your music in the future, and now to the degree that you're able to sound the way that you know it can sound, you have to learn. So I have been, and I've been really woodshedding. I've been working with a speaker company called Kii, K-I-I. And it's incredible technology, because essentially what it does is the DSP in it, and I've always been very reticent to work with speakers with DSP because I feel like I can hear it in the high end. I feel like I can hear like a type of aliasing that happens in the high end with DSP. It's like it's run through a computer. But unless you're in a room that's perfect, which I am clearly not, it's good, but it's not perfect. The low end, and specifically those nodes, which are I know what they are, but I can't really explain it. Each frequency has a length, a physical length in which a waveform takes to complete. I think 40 hertz is something like, I don't even know how many feet one wave is. It's like, I don't know. I think it's like maybe 24 feet or something for each one. And then, the high frequencies are really like that. And finding where these oscillations within the song cancel each other out, create areas in your room where it's the perception of either heightened or decreased energy in those particular frequency ranges. But these speakers, basically through DSP, which I was leery of at first, create an offset between the woofer in the back and side woofers that create a node, which is a cancellation of that particular frequency behind the speaker, where often the distortion comes. So a typical passive speaker will radiate, hit the back wall, and at that point, the back wall, depending on how far it is from your speaker and the geometry of your room, will create these places, either in your listening position or where you're walking around, where the perception of certain frequencies, depending on the length of your room and the distortion of the back wall, make it, in the most basic sense, it's like playing darts in a dark room with the low end. But what these speakers do is the DSP creates an offset between the side shooting woofers and the back woofers that creates a node behind the speaker that essentially vastly reduces the distortion and the reflection from the back wall and creates what is in essence a cardioid pattern in the listening position. All this technobabble, what it ultimately does is it makes the low end from the listening position in many ways, 75, 80, maybe even more, directional. So it's not being influenced by the back wall. And it's a revelation. They're incredibly expensive, but I have an old car, so I might just bite the bullet. All right, calm down. So frustrated, man. But that's what happens. That's what happens at this point. That's what happens at this point. It is very frustrating. I always forget. It's like insane. It's funny. Okay, what's next? I've written down a bunch of notes. Power Nerd is dumb and simple. It's not clever. It's blunt and aggressive. It's not meant to be smart. Okay, so why do I like it then? not only why do I like it, why do I think it's really cool, and why does it happen that every time I think it's not clever enough and I go to add something, it ruins it. And I have to pull it back only to recognize that the nature of the record is what it is. Same with the artwork. Try to do all this clever stuff with the artwork, it looks stupid, pull it back. Try to do all this clever stuff with the music, it sounds crazy, pull it back. And then I'm stuck with this kind of part of me that I think because of the nature of a lot of what I've done in the past, where deconstruction or empath or Ziltoid or Alien or Infinity or whatever, so much of my kind of stock and trade has been rooted in complex puzzles sonically. Each bar has got all these things that happen like this and they interact with this, and it's this congested, melodic, dissonant thing, and I enjoy that on a technical level because it's like a science experiment, and I enjoy that. I really enjoy that. But I recognized while making this record that my life has been so complex on a personal level for the past year that on the eve of getting into The Moth and Axolotl, two records that are fucking super complicated, I wanted to have a record out this year, and I just didn't feel like doing that. I just wanted to write something that was like really cool and fun and kick-ass and up-tempo and not based on trying to be some sort of bullshit armchair intellectual or whatever. It's like, it's dumb, simple stuff, and it really fucks me up because it's emotionally so intense, and it's like, I was trying to think of an equivalent, like what I could say this record would be like, but in some ways there's an element of it that's like Addicted or Transcendence or maybe a bit of Epicloud. But there's another part of me that's just like, oh, as a follow-up to Lightwork and a precursor to what is arguably the most difficult projects that I will ever do, which is The Moth and Axolotl. This is like an appetite whetter that needs to be fun and awesome. And so at first that was the intent, but now that I'm at the tail end and I'm finishing these lyrics and I'm deciding on one of the three melodies in the verse, and I'm deciding on if it's this or that or he or them or whatever in the verses, I realize it's cynical, it's depressed, it's optimistic, it's dirty. It's like Lightwork's like scrappy cousin or something. There's somewhere between some of the things that I've done in the past, but also like the Motorhead, AC/DC, Bon Jovi kind of thing, but it's what I wanted to do. And I felt like, God, now's the time to do it, because I start Moth right away, and it's just, I'm not going to do that again. And in fact, I was talking to one of my coworkers the other day, and I just said, I think this may be the last record that I do like this ever. And so it's got to be like a swan song for it in a sense. I apologize for my heightened sense of, or my heightened state of kind of, it's just what it is, man. I'm on such a tight deadline, and I'm frustrated, and it's hard. It's fucking hard, man. Stayed up till 4 a.m. last night thinking, oh shit, I know what to do with the master bus on this song that was making it sound congested. Let me redo it all. I know I've got no time. I know I got to be up early, but I'm going to do it because I know this is going to make a big difference. And I stayed up till 4 and I listened to it this morning. I was like, it sounds like shit. Sounds like shit. So I had to go back, and then you lose that day. It's like, so it's frustrating, but it's also, every record is like this, and your record's like this, and your buddy who's making a record, it's like this. It's the same. Okay, next note. This is just me bitching today, so I'm going to get into it. Making updates are hard. Making these video updates are hard. I have recorded probably 8 that I haven't shown you, where I've sat and I've recorded this and I've, talked, and then the things that have happened that have prevented me from posting them. You might have noticed there'd be a couple of weeks where none came up. I had them on YouTube, but then I erased them. Why? Because depending on the frame of mind that I find myself in, and it fluctuates every day, as is the nature of making music, some days I'll be on a high. Some days I'll be like, this is the greatest thing that I've done. And during those updates, I'll be recording myself talking, and then I realize after the fact I'm proud of myself in a way that sounds like the process and everything that I'm parroting my past self about the process and all these things. It comes across on those days, those ones that I consequently took down, that I'm speaking as if I'm like curing some sort of disease. Like the importance of this and the impact of the music will be of such magnitude that it needs to be spoken of in hushed tones. And then when the fog clears and when I step away from it and the next song I open up just sounds like horse shit or whatever, you're thinking, man, you've got to be careful. I've got to be careful with my ego with these things, because it's so easy to have like a moment of success with the process and then think, yeah, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be just the shit. And then conversely, I'll have a couple of days where nothing works. And I'm like, man, I think I've made a total dog of a record. I can rationalize it any way I want. I can say, oh, I wanted to make something simple and I wanted it to be dumb and all this stuff. And then there's days where I'm like, yeah, it's simple and it's dumb and it's not that good. And then I speak of the work in those updates that never came out as if the sky was falling. But the truth is somewhere in between. The truth is, you do your best. And the frustration, I think, right now comes from the fact that doing my best requires me to really dig into it. After a period of personal events that make me want to do that less than anything else. The amount of times I think, I just want to fucking go watch TV. I just want to sit. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be in the studio. It's giving me anxiety to be in the studio. I want to go see my friends. I want to go play guitar. I want to mow the lawn. I don't want to do this. And that went on for, a couple of weeks at least, until last week I was like, right, the only way that you get this done, and one of your attributes as a creator, is my ability when the chips are down to say, that's the only way this is going to get done, is digging in and sacrificing those moments. Where was I? All right, that updates. So this is the first update that I've done this week. So if this one doesn't come out, I'm talking to myself now. But so far, I don't feel like it's too far out of line with demonstrating what I was hoping to demonstrate with this series, which is just certain degrees of up and down, but not to the point where it's like manic. Not to the point where one day you're on top of the world and the other day you're like pissing in a jar or something. It's got to be just tempered with a bit of what's the word that we're looking for here? Tempered with a bit of reason, right? All right, mixing is hard. Updates are hard. The act of finishing is just a feeling of relentlessness. I wrote that down. And remembering that that's the case allows us to participate in it without as much, not entirely devoid of, but not as much resentment. Because it's just relentless. You wake up, you gotta start. You're up all day, up all night. Sleeping's difficult. It's in your head. Printing a MP3 on your phone, listening to it in bed, being like, oh, it sounds like shit. Snare sounds like shit, or whatever. People are gonna think, fucking Audio Ninja 745 is gonna think my snare's too compressed. Fuck you, Audio Ninja 725. Go fuck yourself. All right. So, another frustration, seeing I've chosen to lean into the cynicism on this particular update. Another frustration with this record, and I'm going to withhold names because I like everybody that this is pertaining to. In some cases, love them, but when I started Power Nerd, I had this idea of a certain group of people that were going to play on it. Now, the drummer and the bass player that I originally asked for this were very famous and in very famous bands, and they both said yes. But then I couldn't get a hold of them, and what ended up happening is they both ended up joining fucking massive bands the same week. And so they wrote back and they were like, man, I'm sorry, I really wanted to do it. We had all these plans set up, but these are opportunities that I can't not have for my family. So super cool, because what I can offer financially and in terms of like scene points for certain people is like modest. So I held no ill will, and in fact I was like, awesome guys, and thank you for even saying yes in the beginning. But then I ended up playing the bass myself, which I love playing bass, but it's hard to do it the way that I want it to be done. But I did it. Darby ended up saving the day again, and he came in and played drums on this on a day's notice and like really knocked it out of the park. In fact, I question whether or not somebody else would have been able to do it as well as him, because he came with it all scored and all. It was like high level professionalism. And yeah, so those are the drums and bass. And then I had somebody that I wanted to do lead guitar on the record too, because I'm just like, the idea of playing and writing leads, I'm like, man, I realize it's not like, cause I kept telling myself, oh, these people are better than me. And it's not that they're better than me, I just didn't want to do it. And that's fair, because it's been a fucking hard 6 months, right? But then his life exploded, and then he had all this shit going on in his personal life, and he's like, dude, I'm sorry, but I'm just like, I'm fucked. And I was like, I get it. I totally get it. And so I ended up doing it myself. Just bite the bullet and do it. And then I had a guy I don't know who's singing in a popular band that has a great death metal voice. I was like, man, there's a couple songs I got death metal vocals on here, and I just don't. I keep telling myself, I can't do it. I get this guy to do it. But I never met the guy, and then we contacted the people who managed them, and I just wanted a shitload of money, and I was like, I got a couple $100, but yeah, no, man, dude, I can't afford it. So I said, thank you very much, and then I went and did the death metal vocals myself today, and they're all right. Actually, I sound less like Super Grover than I did in the past. They're still not great, but if they're buried underneath the rest of my vocals, they're reasonably convincing. I had this kind of, every step of this I've been asking people, and everybody was like, yes, and then it was like, no, yes, no, yes, no. And so I ended up doing all these things I didn't expect to do. And my buddy who I wanted to mix this with, it's like, I realized very quickly upon sending files, I'm like, uh-oh, I'm not finished writing. I'm going to be changing this constantly. And that's going to put this person into this position where he's never going to be able to get momentum. Plus, I'm going to be spending all this time simply exporting files and sending it out, and then cleaning it and doing it. And my insecurity started to rear its head with that too. I'm like, well, I don't want people to see that maybe there's like a distorted vocal track. I didn't want people to see that maybe my edits aren't perfect and there's clicks and pops here if you really listen. So when I finally bit the bullet and said, hey man, here's some money for your time, and I love you and I'm sorry to waste your time, and I hope we're still cool because you're so good and I love you, and we are cool, it's great, thank God. And then when I started doing it myself, I was like, why is it that I don't care about all these things that are problematic with my recording? Why am I so concerned about other engineers thinking I'm a good engineer? I'm like, dude, you're good at what you do. And what you do is what you do, and you're getting better all the time. And it's a huge workload. And for the most part, you're on your own. So, like, whatever. And I've got other engineer friends who are like, dude, if you're on your own, let me help you. And I've attempted that. But what ends up happening is either I spend way too much time fucking discussing it, way too much time exporting it, or everybody's different. There's engineers in my life who are fantastic that I'll send things that I think are completely fine. And they're like, oh, I can't work with this for whatever reason. It's like that edit there or whatever. And I'm like, really? You can't do that? Because I can do it. They're like, yeah, well, professional things happen. I'm like, well, then I'm not professional. Fuck it. But I don't have the time to learn about that right now. So that's been a thing that has happened on this record. It was like, it started as like this all-star jam thing, and it just ended up being like the Me Show, starring me. All right. Power Nerd is meant to get a record out this year. Otherwise, it will be like 3 years since I've had a record out. I wanted a record out this year. I wanted something to soften the blow of Moth, Axolotl, Puzzle, even Lightwork. In a sense, I wanted to make a record that was like awesome for people, that didn't require a lot of thought and didn't overwhelm people with all the same sort of melodic / compositional maelstrom that I typically incorporate in my composition. I wanted something that people are just like, thanks, Dev, that's badass. Those choruses are great. It's a cool sentiment. Sounds killer. Really cool. And then when I put out Moth, and then when I put out Axolotl, people may be a little bit more tolerant of what I'm about to do with that. But that being said, this isn't like a contrived thing as much as my insecurity has suggested to me on several occasions during the process that that's it. Maybe I had subconsciously thought, oh, I got to give people something easy. I got to give people something melodic. And I was like, well, if that's the case, why do I really fucking love it then? And the answer is because I do all these different things. But this record is a type of record I've never really made. I've never made a record where I've taken the risk of making something that's straight up, And so in the tail end of it, as I'm trying to mix it, I keep second guessing it. I'm like, is it too straight up? Is it too this? Am I doing this? And blah, blah, blah. But then once all the distractions are put aside and I'm able to focus, which is rare right now, and I listen, I'm like, oh, you know what this is. Dude, don't overthink it. It's great. Just fucking do it. All right. This is also what happens with recording. Just like last week when I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to do it. This week I'm like, I don't want to do it, but I love doing it, but sometimes I don't want to do it. I'm almost at the end of this. Wow. All right. One lesson that this Power Nerd record has brought to the forefront in my world more than I ever anticipated is the recognition of the fact that the quality of one's life is dramatically improved when you are not having to pretend you're something you're not. But you still have to do your best. But for me to be like, and it's insidious how these things sneak up on us, to think, Oh, I don't want people to think this. Oh, I hope people aren't critical of this. Oh, I hope people think this is cool. I wonder if people think I'm cool or whatever. Spoiler alert, no. What I do is not super fucking cool, right? But once you are able to swallow where you're at and then really hammer that home, unabashedly, and without the fear that comes from second guessing your process in anticipation of critiques from others, at that point, I remember and I'm reminded constantly through this, even through the problems, even through the workload, even through the files and the low end and all the blah, 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 and money, fuck. Like, even through that, every now and then when I'm able to just see it and hear it, I'm like, oh, it's great. And you mean it and you love it. And that's where you're at. And you don't make excuses for it. It's just, this is it. This is where you're at. So do it. There is a couple people in my life, however, who have supported this record for me on a personal level as I've been going through the ups and downs of it. People that maybe other people think of as being like cool. The cool guys. Who've been very supportive of it. And it makes me think, oh, what's truly cool is being yourself. I've said this quote before. Every update, I've got some stupid Hallmark quote apparently, but it's elusive. What was it? There's something about the that's what it was. If you always tell the truth about who you are, then you never have to remember anything. That was what it was. If you're always hyping yourself up or trying to